Well, good evening. Glad you're here tonight. One just a little piece of business. It's not really a piece of business, but it's just we're looking for some suggestions. This study that we're doing is part of a 3-year thing that we've done here at the church. And what we've done is we've basically tried to expand a little bit the confirmation program into the rest of our church. So the first year we read the Bible, and we did that with all of our groups, including the confirmation program. The second year we did Luther's Catechism. So we took a look at that and got more in depth in Luther's Catechism. And then this year we're sort of exploring other faiths, both other Christian denominations and world religions. Tonight we're looking at Hinduism. But in the upcoming year, we do not yet have that set. We're going to be talking about it. We have a staff retreat coming up here at the end of the month. But over the next week or so, if you're thinking what might be good to study, if you would rather go back to a book of the Bible or a couple books of the Bible, do something biblically next year. But just be thinking about that over the next couple of weeks, and I'll come back to you and ask again what you might be interested in. But we want to do something again next year, but we haven't decided what. So I just thought I'd put it out there. If there's something you've always wanted to study together, what is that? But give us some ideas, and I'll take those to the rest of the staff and see where we go with that. All right? Sound good? Okay. So think about it and let me know, and then we'll go from there. Tonight, we're taking a look at the Hindu faith. And one of the things that I have done when I try to think about world religions is sometimes it's a little bit helpful to think about it geographically. And so, what I mean by that is if you think about where the roots of Judaism came from, it was pretty much in the Middle East, Fertile Crescent area. Of course, Abraham came from the Fertile Crescent to the land of Canaan. They spent some time in Egypt, then came back up through the Sinai into Israel. So it's that part of the world. So if you think about Judeo-Christian faith, you can think sort of the Middle East that then would spread in Western Christianity to Europe, and then of course the United States and around the world. When we think that as you move east, all right, you can think of the Muslim faith and east and south. You can sort of think of Saudi Arabia, you think of Iraq and Iran. Those are sort of more Afghanistan. That's more sort of the center as you move east and south of Islam, the Islamic faith. Then as we go further east into India, which is today's lesson, you can think of that as sort of the home of Hinduism, although these borders aren't exact. They move around and there's different pockets, etc. As you move further to the east, you hit China, which is where more of the Buddhist faith would be. And then if you go clear to Japan, you really get more Shintoism in Japan than you get Buddhism. So if you think about Judeo-Christianity, Islam, right? Then we move to India, Hinduism, China, Buddhism, Japan, Shintoism. Sometimes that helps me to keep some geographic idea of the peoples that we're talking about. It's not limited to that. Of course, all these with travel today and people going different places, there's lots of pockets of everything everywhere, whether it's the Hindu faith or Islamic or Judaism or Christianity, it's all over the world in different places. But just as birthplaces, that's sort of where the part of the world that we're talking about. One of the things I wanted to do, which we haven't been doing until last, is to look at the chart, because I think it may give us a little better idea just as we start out before we're talking about the Hindu faith. So I've usually looked at the chart last, but today, because I'm not, a grand master of the Hindu faith, I thought that might be a good place to start. So if you look at the teaching versus what we believe as Lutherans, okay, they would call God Brahman. Of course, we would call God Father, Son, and Holy Spirit the God. However, like our God that meets as Father, Son, and Spirit, their Brahman is seen as various manifestations such as Rama, Sita, and Krishna and Radha. All right. But they believe those are manifestations of their God. We still believe in one God. We're monotheists. They believe the universe is an illusion, a misperception of the one reality that is Brahman. All right. So it's a little bit of a negative view of this life. And then in this life, we hit this with some other religions too, especially Buddhism, that this life has a lot of suffering and bad things happen, and it's hard. Um, and I mean, I don't want to make this over characterization, but think about growing up in India. I mean, India is hard. I mean, I think there's a lot of poverty there. There's a caste system there. And so the idea that this life in Hinduism is not the true life, and that we're trying to link up our inner life with the life of God later on. Do you see what's happening there? So let me put this in another way if I can. This life stinks. There's another life that's better. And part of what we're trying to do in this life is to connect with that. And as we learn to connect with that, they of course believe in reincarnation. We come back to better and better versions of who we are until finally then we would become one with God. All right. They sometimes call it nirvana or reach the Brahman. Okay. All right. So this life is bad. Christians, on the other hand, believe that what God created is good. You may remember that in Genesis, after each day, God saw that what God has made was good. And on the sixth day, you may remember that God not only said it was good, but God said it was tov ma'ot. It was very good, right? So Christianity has this idea that the creation that we have is God's creation. And within that creation is goodness. Now, we've messed it up through sin, etc. But at its very root, we believe the creation is a beautiful thing that God has made, and we don't need to simply escape from it. All right. So if you look at number 3 here, now they believe that their goal in life is to realize their oneness with Brahman. Do you see how I don't want to push this too much because it's not exactly right, but there's a little bit of escapism there, right? This life is bad. We have to become one with God to be fully satisfied to reach completion. Lutherans would argue this life is good. God made this life. There are good things in this life. Now, our number 3 teaches that we are alienated from God through sin, right? But we are saved by Christ and brought back to God. Okay, number 4, they believe in karma, this idea of cause and effect. If you do bad things here, it's a very simple ethic. We saw that in Islam as well. If you do bad things here and you have more bad than good, you're in trouble, right? We believe that although humans have the freedom to disobey God, all is still under the umbrella of God's law and grace. You see, that's a fundamental difference there. Okay. We don't believe in works righteousness. The goal of being a Christian is not to make sure that all your sins are covered and you can do more good things than bad things. We believe we're alienated from God and we're in need of redemption. And thanks be to God through his son, Jesus Christ, who saves us to reunite us with God. It's a different understanding. Number 5, the Hindus teach that the path to realizing our oneness with Brahman may take many lifetimes, in which we take many forms. Okay? That's not what we believe. We believe that we are made once in the image of God, and that eventually God will resurrect us with him. We don't keep coming back until we get it right. Everyone see the differences here? By the way, if some of you know what the rule is in India, when you believe in reincarnation, do you see how this also keeps in place the caste system? All right. So in India, when there are higher castes and lower castes of people, one way to describe that is it's a religious thing. If you come back as poor and miserable, that's because you must have been poor and miserable in a previous life. You understand what I mean? If you come back as higher and wealthy and a better caste, it's because obviously in a previous life you were good, so you deserve your caste. So those who are at the bottom, who are outcasts, are not brought up during this lifetime because they're that caste because that's what they deserved. What they can do is to live the best they can within their caste and then one day be reincarnated in a higher caste and in a sense work their way up. Now, do you understand how that can trap people? It also can force um, sort of a racist that you're within your caste and you can't get out of it because God has put you there. Is everybody with me on this? You
Hmm.
understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. It can be sort of a heavy weight then. And rather than help the poor have a better life, you're like, well, you deserve it. If you're poor, it's because you had created that for yourself by living a bad life several lives ago or something. You understand how this works? And so the caste system in India has been very hard to break through, to change, because they believe it's instituted by God that way. You sort of get what you deserve, okay? Which is also a way of not allowing people to get out of that system. And that's why when we see Indian people sometimes immigrate to other parts of the world, that's when they can break out of that caste system. Of course, if you're poor, you may never have a chance to do that. Okay. The type of worship is primarily meditation, the repetition of mantras or holy words. I think sometimes you've maybe heard people making an om, that's OHM, an om sound. Um, and to remember the Brahman with offerings of food and flowers and incense. We follow a pattern worship, liturgical, where there's different pieces we put together. There is no overall governance. Okay. Again, like Islam, this is somewhat a way of life. It's a spiritual direction. People don't belong to congregations. You go to the local guru if you want, or you go to a temple if you want, but there's not authorities and ordained priests and all that kind of structure that we would have in our church. Okay. And again, the author of our section today has made it very clear that this is one type of Hinduism that he's looking at. There are many types, just like there is in Christianity, Islam, etc. Okay. Any questions just on that chart? I sort of wanted to do that first to get us sort of in some space together. Questions? I want to read from you a couple of little short things. This is from a book that I don't even know if you know Kieran McCoy in our congregation. She gave it to me. Her mom had it. Her dad was Hindu, and she gave me this. This book was called "Great Religions of Modern Man," is what it is, and it was written actually in 1961, so it's as old as I am. But I want to just describe because I think it's sort of an interesting look at Islam. And this is just the first page. It's a little introduction. It's not too long. I just want to read it and see what a Hindu says about Hinduism. Okay. One might at first attempt a geographical definition of Hinduism by recognizing it, the totality of religious forms which originally developed on Indian soil. That's what I was saying. If you think about it, starting in India. It would then be necessary, this author says, to exclude Buddhism, because there's also that, which in ancient days spread across a large part of Hindustan and still remains very much alive in some areas of the continental borderlands. It would also be necessary to exclude Jainism, which is today about 1.5 million followers, although in the past it was relatively at least more widespread. Other groups would also have to exclude 6 million Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians, and some 25 million fetishists and animists who might say participate in varying degrees in elementary forms of Hinduism. Okay, so it's not just Indian, but that's where it grew up. In relation to the mass of the Indian population, which at present, this is 1961, numbers about 400 million, these groups are practically negligible both statistically and culturally. That is not the case, however, with Islam. Since the 11th century, Islam has steadily drawn millions of persons from the Hindu community. And even today, in spite of the creation of Pakistan as a Muslim state within the subcontinent, Islam has some 35 million followers in the Indian Union. And we know it has actually increased since then. As for Sikhism, or the religion of the Sikhs, it may be considered a religious movement to the extreme limits of Hinduism. It is not considered a heresy by Hindus. To confine Hinduism to the circumference of India would be to bypass the missionary character of this religion in the past. In the so-called Hinduization of Southeast Asia, Indian religious influences combined with indigenous elements and in the course of time were assimilated by Buddhism, Islam, and some other form of national religion. In this way, Hinduism has had a profound influence in Cambodia, ancient Champa, and Bali. One should also recall that there are Hindus in Ceylon, Nepal, and Pakistan, and in Indian settlements scattered all over the world. So this author is simply making the point that if you think of Hinduism, which isn't necessarily missionary in focus, it can go almost anywhere and adapt in almost any way. So it's possible that you can understand yourself to be a Hindu, but also attend a Christian church, right? Or Judaism or Islam, because they're sort of principles of Hinduism. And then just read a couple of things before we go back to the book. These are a couple of poems that are from the Vedas, which is their sacred scripture. And I just want to see if they remind you at all of the Psalms that we have. So I just want to read a couple of short ones. This is number 3. Keep me from vanity, keep me from pride. For sure I perish if I quit thy side. From this deceiving world, how hard to flee. Ah, thou Lord, deliver me. If once thy gracious face I look upon, the world's enticement then is past and gone. Sounds somewhat psalmish. And let me read another one here. This is called The Only Refuge. I am a mass of sin. Thou art all purity. You see the thing, this world, me, sinful, God is pure. I am a mass of sin. Thou art all purity. Yet thou must take me as I am and bear my load for me. Me, death has all consumed. In thee all power abides. All else forsaking at thy feet, thy servant hides. It does reinforce, some of the things that we were talking about early on, that there's a general dislike of this world as a place of troubled and an attempt to reunite with this sacred God. Okay? Do you hear that in that little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Let's go back then to the book. Any questions?
I have a question. Um, you often see Indian women with the red dot on their
Yeah.
forehead. Is is that to do with Hinduism, or what is that? Is that to do with their you don't know?
Yeah. I think it is, but honestly, I have no idea. The only I have heard, sometimes I've heard people joke we're Indian. That's a dot, not a feather. Have you heard that? But to be honest, I don't know what the dot represents. I don't know if it. I'll open it up to the group. Does anyone else know? Is that a form of being Indian? I mean, by India, I mean the subcontinent of India, or is it simply a Hindu thing to have that there? I really
Right.
don't know.
Because this didn't address it at all. So
No, it didn't. No, not at all. Pete, do you
Well,
know?
I just
Or you
Googled it. Um,
and
the top thing that came up says it's called a bindi. Says a decorative
okay,
mark
I
on
have
the
heard that.
forehead worn by Hindu women and members of some other religious groups, traditionally believed to be venerating an energy center of the human body or representing the third eye, but also worn as an adornment or a sign of marriage.
Okay. Well, there you have it. So it is Hindu, and it's a sign of that inner being. Can also be a sign of marriage. Is that what you're saying? Yeah,
That's
I'm
what it
just not
says
familiar
here.
with it. I have certainly seen it before as well. So yes. So there you go. But honestly, I've seen it, but I really didn't know what it was. So okay. Other questions or comments? And of course, all of these things, it's interesting, they do tend to take on the garb of wherever they were. So if you think about the garments that, I mean, those are saris, those are native to India. And just like Jesus and his group wore tunics and togas, and I mean, it's what they wore. And so, of course, we've adopted that today as well. Okay. Well, let's take a little look at the history then. This is on page 62. Um, if you see this came about some 2000 to 3000 BCE. That's 4 to 5,000 years ago. is when this knowledge and they were done in Vedas, which means knowledge, and they were done in Sanskrit. Okay. And again, the primary philosophy of all of these things is about how do we connect with and center ourselves on God, who's the Brahman. And the idea is that the spirit is inside of us. And when we reach the fullest value, we will become one with God. All right. That's not a very Christian idea, right? We believe that God made human beings in God's image, right? And we don't aspire to be God, or we're not working our way up the great chain of being to be like God. We are human beings with our frailties and failings. We're in need of forgiveness, and we need a savior in order to do that. But this is this idea that we're almost part of this holy light that can either be nurtured or it can be squelched, and then that will, in the afterlife, one way or the other, is going to say who we are. Okay. All right. If you look at the top of page 63, I just want to quote what they say in here. The nature of human beings. Our true nature is divine, emerging from Brahman. We fail to realize our own divine nature because we believe what our senses tell us. They take it in what seems to be a finite, divided, changing universe that follows the law of causation. We assume that is reality. Our genetic programming, as well as our scientific worldview, make us identify with our body and mind. We feel finite, separated from the rest of the universe, and subject to change, disease, and death. The goal of life, as understood by Hinduism, is to see through our mistake and realize our true nature, as seen within the illusion of space and time. We're individual souls seeking to be united with the absolute Brahman called the Paramatman. Okay? So again, although human beings were made in the image of God, we do not believe in the Judeo-Christian that we are God or that some piece of us is God. What we believe is that God breathed life into us as God breathed life into animals and plants and other things on the earth. It doesn't make animals and plants or human beings God. All right. But if you thought of the Brahman as just light, it's almost like every person has a little piece of that light. And your idea within the Hindu is to continue to nurture that light and to increase it by staying away from this world and meditating on God so that you eventually graduate or seek your way up to that light. With me? And of course, they believe this has meditation. You can see why some of this was sort of popular by some of the, what do I want to say, people in the 60s who were looking to escape
60s children.
And yes, hippies, that there's a sense of this in which, let's all just get in a yoga pose and hum and be one with God. Now, I'm not saying that there's not something good to yoga and meditation. I think there's some things that can be very good about relaxing. But I would also argue that in addition to smoking weed and being in the lotus position, you might also have some things to do, like help other people, do something, all kinds of things. So it's sort of a thing that hit sort of those flower children and really connected what they wanted to do, because they wanted to, they were critical of society, right? They wanted to opt out of society because they saw society as the Vietnam War, as being racist against Black people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so there was a generational shift in the 60s, not by everyone. You're not going to have to tell me if you went to a farm in Connecticut for a week and smoked pot. You don't have to tell me that. But there was a sort of a movement to get away from what they saw as the strictures of society. And I think that connected very well with the Hindu philosophy about love and peace and connecting ourselves with the soul of the universe. You see how that was sort of a nice little marriage there in the 60s? Mm-hmm. Okay. It also justifies other things, though, as I've mentioned in the Indian culture, where it also justifies a caste system, which keeps people in their place, et cetera, et cetera. So it can have good and bad consequences. All right. All right. Let's look at the second thing here, which is karma and reincarnation. I think if the truth be told, most of us believe a little bit in karma, don't we? I mean, I think that most people think that if you're if you do good things and you are kind to people, that will come back to you. You know, it's sort of like the you reap what you sow. And if you're mean to people, well, then you're going to get yours, right? Like the
Yeah.
reason my
You like to
Philadelphia
think that
Eagles won the
anyway.
Super Bowl, the reason my Eagles won the Super Bowl is because they were good to other people and therefore they won the Super Bowl, right? Not really. And I'm not that much. I'm really not that much of an Eagles fan. But anyways, I mean, we have this idea that you're going to get paid for what you do. In our Wednesday night class, someone mentioned we were studying Islam, and we've seen this in cartoons. And I actually asked our boys about it, and they said yes, it's true. They believe they have a little person on their shoulder, like an angel, and we one is good and one is bad, and one's trying to pull you to do bad things, and the other one's trying to get you to do good things. Haven't you seen this in comic strips and things like that?
Oh yeah,
Right?
the little angel and the devil on your
Yeah,
shoulders.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. That's a Islam. They actually have names for those little creatures that sit on your shoulder. And the way that you make yourself through life is you listen to the one that's giving you the correct information and the right things, and discount the one who's being evil. Well, that's a little bit like what karma is like. That you're supposed to follow the good angel on your shoulder and not listen to the bad one, right? And I think some of us believe in that to a certain extent, but it's not really very Christian. we we don't believe that God is keeping charge. Actually, as Lutherans, what we very much believe is that humanity left to itself is going to choose sin over doing good if we just have our own way, because within all of us is that sinful nature. I think most of you know probably by heart now the confession we have at the front of our service. All right. We confess that we are by nature sinful and unclean, right? We believe that's at the core of being a human being, is that we do not choose God. And so therefore we're in need of forgiveness. All right. So there's for a Christian, we don't believe there's any way that you can earn your way to heaven. That's not how we get there. We get there through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, not by the good things we do. We want you to do good things. We want you to know that God loves you and you can live in that love and the forgiveness that God grants you, but you're not buying your way to heaven by what you do. Whereas here we sort of have a very simple, you're good, you're going to go to heaven and make your way up into reincarnated life. And if you're bad, you're going to suffer. Okay. Questions about that?
I notice here it says that that suffering due to karma, it might be in the next life. So that
Right.
you see this guy doing bad and living high on the hog and everything, and you think, well, he'll get it next time around.
Right. He might come back as an ant next time or something.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
Exactly.
I've heard it said that it's hard to believe in karma when certain people are never hit by lightning.
Well, I go inside when lightning hits. If I'm on a golf course, I'm not giving God a free shot at me. I know my life too well. So, at any rate, yes, we do think that. You notice down at the bottom about this duality between God and goddesses. Okay, they talk a little bit about that sort of, this male-female duality that we see sometimes. Some people call that yin and yang. I think you've seen that before. If you turn over on the next page, they talk quite a bit about yogas and meditations and different kinds of these spiritual practices. Um, and again, I think the general idea is you're trying to get in touch with this universal God. And so I think it was popular at one time where people would go to ashrams in India, and they would spend some time there. And by spending time there, they could collect themselves. And what's the book that I've read? I forget it, but where she goes to India and does this, and eating more holistically. And the idea is you're escaping from this reality. But the other thing I always point out when you see these people that do this, it's usually people that are independently wealthy. I mean, how many of us could go say, let's go spend 2 months in an ashram in India? I mean, maybe when you're just out of school, you could because you don't have any responsibilities. But I think most of us, that would be a difficult thing to do. But at any rate, this idea of getting in touch and things, I think there's some value to that. But again, I don't believe it's the be all and end all of our life together. Okay. I want to look at and then they talk about the organization, and really it's not overly organized, uh, these different things. All right. I do want to look at, I thought some of the discussion questions are good. That number one, have you ever had any exposure to Hindu people or beliefs? If so, how have these influenced your opinion of Hinduism?
Nope.
Just to show hands here, if you've been exposed much to Hinduism, raise your hand. See, I think that's pretty common among us. I mean, I think that in large measure, the Hindu people we know sort of keep to themselves. And it's also not the sort of missionary zeal. Like everybody's responsible for themselves. So I'm not going to come over and say, hey, you have to join me and be Hindu like I am. Whereas Christianity, we want to tell people about the salvation that is ours in Jesus Christ. We want you to know about it. And so we're a little more out there with our evangelism. But yes, I don't think many of us know much about the Hindu faith because we haven't bumped into it too much, right? How many of you have ever been to a Hindu temple, for instance? Nobody, right?
I had a neighbor who was Hindu, and it was a little
Okay.
it was a little interesting because right before Christmas, her house was the most lit up house on the whole street. This is in Dublin.
Well,
and I
and
said,
see,
she was from Kerala, and I said, "Oh, are you Christian?" She goes, "No, we just like Christmas lights." She goes, "My husband's really
Right.
mad because I bought them before Christmas." But she didn't tell me anything about her religion, though.
right. But I think that sort of adaptation to the culture is very Hindu. You want to put up Christmas lights? I like Christmas lights. Let's put them up. Whereas I think most Christians would say, we do it because we're celebrating the birth of Christ. We live next door to Islamic people. We have two guys in the house who are Muslims also. They never put up Christmas lights because they see it as celebrating Christmas. I have to say, though, that we probably lived next to them for 15 years. There's never been a Christmas where they haven't brought a gift over to us. Now, why is that? They know we're Christian. So they bring some candy or, or cookies or something. They've always brought it over to our house and said Merry Christmas. But they don't celebrate the Christian holiday in any way. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like we realize they do. So we've done the same thing to them during Ramadan. We'll go over and eat and take them some, we've often taken them dates or other things like that as they celebrate. I'm not celebrating Eid because it's not my holiday, but I'm celebrating with them for it. You see what I mean? But they don't have Christian symbols up. Whereas in the Hindu religion, they might do Christmas because, well, what's the difference? It's sort of a fun time of year. It doesn't hurt them, right?
It's
Okay.
an illusion anyway. So
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Number two, compare the Hindu understanding of Brahman as the only reality within the Christian belief in a separate sovereign God. How might this difference affect how you look at life? Okay, the Hindu understanding of Brahman is the only reality within the Christian belief in a separate sovereign God. All right. Is that what you believe about our God? Separate and sovereign?
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing, of course, is that while they believe in that, they also believe in different manifestations of the Brahman in these different things that we've talked about, and different deities and things. We don't believe that Jesus was an expression of God. We believe Jesus was God. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
okay, get your mind around this a little bit. I'm going to mess with you here a little bit. You ready, Eric? All right. So when Jesus died on the cross, what we believe is that God died on the cross. All right. But also think about it this way. When Jesus died on the cross, Satan thought he had won. The problem is Christ ended up in hell. And now you've got the light that no darkness can overcome. It's like, oh crap. Can you imagine the day that the devil woke up and thought, what did I do? Did I want that light down here? I don't think so. And all of a sudden. So, but it is sometimes hard for us to get our heads around that we believe Jesus was also God. We know the human part, but remember in the creed, he was truly human, truly divine, both at the same time, begotten, not made, born like we're born, but we believe it was God in the flesh. Okay? In the Latin, if you ever go to Nazareth, verbum caro factum est, and the word became flesh, right? And lived among us. All right? That's what we believe. And they believe something a little bit different. They believe in sort of this, what I would call a light force that we're all trying to get back to. And we've got a little piece of this light in front in us that we're now trying to gain our way back and work our way back to that light. There's also, of course, like the Greeks, I hope you hear a little bit in Hinduism, this idea of immortality. Because isn't that in fact what reincarnation is?
Mm-hmm.
Reincarnation is not resurrection, where we die and then Christ raises us from the dead. Reincarnation is immortality. You just keep going, like the Energizing Bunny, right? Keep going and going and going. You never stop until finally you reach Brahman, right? And then you don't need any more lives because you're Brahman. You've made it to God. We don't believe that we're going to be God someday. We believe that God is going to raise us from the dead, not to make us God, but so that we can live with God forever. Do you see the difference? Like Christians don't believe there's ever a time when we become God. That's not happening, right? But they believe eventually your light will be one with this light. You'll go into the light and be part of it. That's often portrayed, by the way, in movies. Have you ever seen that where don't step into the light or whatever the universe is beyond in movies? It's light. It's sort of pulling you in, right? That's not quite what we believe in the church. We believe we die, and then Christ will raise us from the dead. Thoughts? Do any of you do yoga? Go ahead, Pete.
One of the things in here that struck me as it's hard to kind of wrap your mind around this. But one of the things that struck me is on page 64 in the bullet point that starts, the goal is to realize that they're saying that an obstacle is forgetting that the world is God in disguise. And that's what?
And thus being distracted by your senses.
Yeah, but yeah. I mean, we don't certainly believe that the world is God.
Right. That's pantheism. Right. Yeah, the goal is to realize or attain your oneness with God. That, I mean, maybe in Star Trek terms, we're trying to get back to the mothership, right? We all start in the same place. We're all trying to get back there. Yeah, that's not quite what I believe. Yeah, it's a little, I don't really understand it. I understand the meditation, which we would call prayer. I was asking about, have any of you ever done yoga in your life?
Yeah.
You have? Yeah. Okay. Do you find it helpful, not helpful? Do you still do it?
No, I don't do it anymore. No, I didn't really do it for
religious reasons.
Right, for meditation or whatever. But
you did it more for exercise, like Pilates or something?
Imbalance, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I did notice that they do believe in that a person has a soul. That's about the only common thread that I can see.
Right. But we would say our soul and body are one. They're together. So like when you die, we believe your soul also, we're combined. We have a soul, but it's combined.
Right.
Okay. And so when you die, all of you dies, and then all of you is resurrected. Okay. If you think about Psalm 103, bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless God's holy name, right? It's everything that is me. It's together. It's not separate. Okay. So the Greeks believed we have this soul, and obviously they do too, that sort of floats out of your body, right? So Karen, I think some of you know Karen, she gave me this. Her father recently died, who had this book. And of course, he wants his ashes to be put back in the river Ganges in India. That's what they do there. And the idea is that then it sort of returns to the earth and then you'll return again. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, if that's worth your wishes, I think that's what she's going to do. She'll have to travel there to do it. But this idea of starting over, you know, the Ganges is a holy river. You're supposed to bathe in it. And then when you die, you pour your ashes in it. Do you see that sort of cycle of life that's happening for people who believe in Hinduism? Yeah, I believe I'll be fine. I've got an apartment here in the columbarium, and I'll be ready to go when Jesus raises us from the dead. We'll be good. So I don't need to travel to India. I'm good here. Okay. All right. I didn't know that there's different kinds of yoga. I mean, I knew some people do hot yoga. Is that right?
My
And some people
brother
do
has
just
done that.
regular hot yoga. The idea, I think, it really loosens you up, and they overheat the room, right? But I didn't realize that there were these 4 different types that are described here. The karma yoga. I don't know if that's jnana yoga, affirming your true nature. Look at what they're supposed to say there. This is the second one on page 64. Jnana. Say, I am not the mind. I am not the body. I am pure existence, pure consciousness, pure bliss. I mentioned this a couple times before, but do you hear sort of the escapism in that? You're getting away from this life. And you can see in the 60s drug culture, if you're high and you're doing stuff and you're on LSD or whatever, there's a way in which that's an out of body experience, is it not? I mean, if you take enough drugs and stuff, you sort of have that. Whoa. I've never taken LSD, but I've heard. But that idea of you're on some sort of an acid trip. I am not the mind. I'm not the body. I'm pure existence. Do you hear that at all in that? That sort of escapism, getting out of everything. Then they have here Bhakti Yoga, which, by the way, was in the New York Times crossword puzzle recently. I didn't know it, but I figured it out. Just FYI. Developing a loving relationship with a personal aspect of God. Choose a deity, any deity, just choose a deity or an incarnation of God. Relating everything in your life to the chosen deity. Perform a ceremony, a rite or sacrament called a puja or worship. The puja gives the worshiper the aid of physical objects and actions to keep the worshiper's mind on the chosen form of God. I mean, I don't want to be overly critical here, but that sounds a little bit like idolatry to me. You know, choose your favorite statue, your favorite idol, and worship it, and so try to become one with it is what it basically do. So, anyways, again, I've not practiced these. And then the fourth one is called the Raja Yoga. And this again, gaining control over the mind. This is done through meditation, calming the mind to get a clear view of its true nature, repetition of sacred words or mantras, and breath control help to amplify the spiritual vibrations. Wow. Alrighty then. Okay. So again, I don't understand it. I suppose I've done some yoga at some time, which I see mostly as stretching and things. But some people claim this is a way to be part of this life. But I guess the question that I would have is, once you do these things, so what? Like, now what? You know, it seems to be just sort of lost. I mean, I know we're busy, but then where do you go from here? I don't know. I don't get it, but I'm not pretending to be an expert. So, questions or comments? We've got a kitty cat in the room. Barb's cat is here.
Yep. I found this
Anything?
to be very confusing, reading the whole understanding of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah, because it's not like believing a doctrine. It's sort of like just getting in touch with your inner self or something. I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah. You know. Anybody else?
I don't understand how it's transmitted to another. I mean, if you're just born into that, because there's no evangelism. I mean, you said they do have some
Right.
temples, but I mean, they don't aggressively try and spread this Hinduism. So
Right.
I don't.
Right. So I think if you're born into it, if you learn it from your friends, neighbors, relatives, there's some people in the United States who have sought it out, like I said, just as a way of sort of escaping and getting back. But yeah, there's not, yeah, all of the above. Yes. And it's not necessarily growing as a world religion either.
So there's no doctrine. There's no.
Not so much. The doctrine is just, do good things, get in touch with your inner self, and live your life. Yeah. But I don't want to just judge them because I don't know about them, but it's not for me, but maybe for some people they find peace there, and if they find peace there, I say go for it. But I'd want to learn a little bit more and talk a little bit more, and also ask questions like, so what do I need to do now? Not just good and evil, but how can we help one another, love one another, etc. So, but to each its own, their own. So, all right. Next week, I just want to remind you, we have a couple different things coming. We're going to look at Judaism. So that should be a little easier for all of us since we come out of the Judeo-Christian tradition. The week after that, we're taking a look at Jehovah's Witnesses. And then we're going to take a break on Ash Wednesday, just for that week. And then I do want you to be thinking about over the next week, what kind of study might you be interested in starting in the fall of next year? So just think about that. If you want to take up some Bible or if you want to do something else, and just let me know. We'll talk about it next time we're together. All right. Okay, let's all do the holy Om. Om. Feeling it yet? I don't know. If I got in the yoga position, I don't think I could get back up. In the lotus position, I'd be stuck on the floor. So, but we have a train coming, so we can help get up. Blessings to all of you. Stay warm out there. We will look at Judaism, which should be a little more in our strength next week, and then we go on from there. All right. All right. Blessings, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.